viewers from Jamaica, the Caribbean, and across the world. We're welcoming listeners and viewers, and we're very, very excited to have you join our podcast, Working on Winning. With me in studio is my co-host and very special guest, Simon Azan, and we're excited and delighted to have you with us because we want to share some very interesting information, some very relevant information, as we're facing the dynamic changes taking place in Jamaica, our country, and across the world. There are changes that are changing the way we live and work. And it's not just technology, it's human ingenuity, it's leadership, it's many, many things that are contributing to this dynamic, brave new world. I'm here broadcasting in Kingston from a very lovely studio, Ideas and Evolutions. And this is a studio that many of our creatives and artists are produced in. And so I'm very happy to be here, to be part of this dynamic setting. We have our producer, Dean Mundy, and we have his co-producer, Sean Carr, and we really are getting ourselves organized to share some very, very interesting information with you. Now, you may notice that right behind me is a very beautiful piece of work. It was done by the late Ken Ramsey. It was designed for me, and it represents mind power. You'll see that it's a human head, and it's being seen generating an electrical and very, very innovative look, because we are acknowledging that all that is happening is coming out of human ingenuity. We are really quite fascinated by technology. But when we look at it, it is the human mind that is creating this brave new world. And we spoke the last time with a group of young millennials who are working with the technology that seems to be driving things. But behind that technology, we must always remember that it's human ingenuity, and it's leadership, and it's innovation. And so our first podcast really looked at how artificial intelligence and information technology were driving change. In today's production, we're going to be looking at the whole thing of leadership as a success factor, because we are in very heady times. We are in unpredictable and uncertain times. And we really need to think about how these changes are impacting us and how we're going to find our way to the promised land where nobody really has the answers. We see that there are leaders across the world that are grappling with things like the pandemic. They're grappling with things like natural disasters, huge economic changes, social upheavals, and we're looking to them to guide us. And there are things that we need to focus on. We need to look really at what we expect of leadership, what we think of leadership as. And we need to really begin to look at how we select our leaders, what we expect of them, and what we as followers need to do to keep them on point. So, in my conversation today, I have someone, I already told you his name is Simon Azan. He is a dynamic leader in his own right. He has been a corporate leader. He is a corporate leader. He also has been a commando in the military. He's a minister of religion. He is a consultant, a coach, and a family man. So very multifaceted. And I want to welcome you, Simon. It's wonderful to have you because you're going to speak from experience today. And I want you to talk about this whole thing that we are looking at, leadership. It has a lot of mystique, but we give it great importance. But if we ask people on the whole to explain to us what it is that they see leadership as, we get very varied responses.
Absolutely.
So I'd like you to sort of set the tone, the framework for this discussion, and tell us what really is leadership and why do we place so much importance on it?
Well, thank you for having me, Gillian. It's a privilege to be here, having this conversation with you. And as you rightfully said, I'm going to try and speak from a position of past experience, present experience, and hopefully shed what I consider my own light on leadership, which is intrinsically important to our lives in every sphere. One thing that you highlighted during the introduction, and thank you for that very flower introduction. Very, very endearing introduction.
Very good introduction.
Oh, thank you. You're most kind. But you mentioned a few spheres, including family, which shows me that leadership really is in every single sphere of life. Even though we're looking at leadership on a wider, larger scale corporately. We're looking at world leaders and their impact on society and the world in general. But leadership really starts within what I call the inner circles of one's life. For example, if one is a family man, then you're already a leader in your own right because you have people now that are looking to you for guidance. And if I may put leadership into two words, I would say that leadership is about impact and influence. Impact, because it takes place up close, and influence, which dictates how one operates. What is the end result of that impact? What are you going to do when you have been impacted by that individual? And the leadership has to come from an individual, even though in today's society, you find that a lot of impact and influence is coming from cell phones, from social media, from some inanimate object, something that is at a distance, that is not up close. Leadership has transitioned, which shows me also that leadership is fluid. It's a very fluid thing because you can have impact and influence from somebody who is miles away, or some program, some influential social media platform that you have no actual contact with.
But Simon,
And influence your decision.
You mentioned that remote because when we look at world events as they are now,
Right.
the recent death of Queen Elizabeth II, she's not near to us, although she is the Queen of
Right.
Jamaica currently. She is in a remote place. She's in England, and yet when we look at the outpouring of sentiment across the world, and people saying how very close they felt she was to them, she connected with them. Now, irrespective of how we feel about monarchy, there is something very, very dynamic that happened to make someone, a woman, and a monarch, connect with people of all cultures across the world. And people felt that she was close to them. Some people felt that she was like their grandmother. Some people called her the matriarch.
Right.
Some people saw her in royal terms, but whatever it was, she connected. And then we look also at things like what's happening in Europe at the moment with Putin waging his war against Zelensky and the Ukraine. And when we see President Zelensky, we feel as though we know this man. He's speaking to us. He's connecting with us in terms of courage and grace under pressure.
Right.
And we see all kinds of leaders being thrown up. Closer to home, we've seen some young leaders like Nigel Clark, our finance minister, and of course our Minister of Foreign Affairs,
Right.
Kamina Johnson. And we see also some other leaders that have become household names like
Right.
Alan Stewart, Christopher Zaka, Earl Jarrett. These are people we sort of feel we know them.
Right.
And where does that come from?
Well, I mean, you mentioned some very influential names abroad on a world scale, CNN type individuals, I would call them. And then you mentioned individuals who are impacting here at home and certainly regionally, like Mr. Adam Stewart. I've had the pleasure of working with some of these individuals who you have mentioned. And I can tell you that leadership is a part of their intrinsic nature. It just by virtue of the amount of responsibility and the lives that they are responsible for, some form of leadership is going to emerge out of it. And when I mention some form, this is by no means casting any aspersions, whether positive or negative, on any of these people that we have mentioned. But there is going to be impact. There is going to be influence based on the level of interaction, influence, relationship that one may have with any of these individuals.
But there's a certain mystique to, isn't there? There was almost a sort of biblical thing about the leader being ordained. And if I remember from what I read in the Bible, when the children of Israel asked for a king,
Right.
God sort of said, do
Right.
you really want a king? Do you know what you're in for? And of course, there was the whole thing of David and all that has come down to us. So we have, in many ways, in our Judeo-Christian culture, we have this idea of the leader being somebody ordained, being somebody special. And at
Right.
one time, there was the divine right of kings.
Right.
Until a few people lost their heads, that is.
Wow. I'd love to weigh in on this one because as you know, I am a minister by profession, one of the professions, and this is an area that I absolutely, well, it's sort of the guiding path that governs my life. God is intrinsically the most important individual in my life, and I'm guided by the scriptures and guided by the influence and impact of those biblical leaders. You mentioned one in particular where the children of Israel were clamoring for a leader, but their mindset in terms of being one-dimensional was so evident in the fact that they wanted someone who was tall, handsome, a military man, not really zoning in on what was necessary, what was going to be needed to guide them into a better way of life, into a biblical way of life. They were basically looking on the outside man. So they wanted someone who they could boast in. Oh, that's our king right there. Well, he prevailed for a while, but didn't persevere until God deemed it fit to bring in somebody who he wanted. Did not fit that. He was shorter in stature, maybe not as good looking, but he had a shepherd's heart, which brings me to the subject of shepherd, leaders leading like a shepherd. There's a saying that I learned in Bible school that says, good shepherds smell like sheep.
Okay.
Good shepherds smell like sheep, which means that you are inextricably linked to those who you are influencing. If they're in the trenches, you're in the trenches.
Is that really so? Are we seeing, well, in our times anyway, the leaders getting down amongst the people, listening, understanding, being there in the trenches? Are we getting that feel in modern times?
Well, you're probably we more often than not are not seeing that. I can speak to, and I don't remember. I don't even remember his name, but the prime minister of Ukraine. He's grown a beard. He has adopted a semi-military type of garb, and you get no sense that he's trying to identify with what his military are going through, his entire country is going through. He's not presenting himself in a three-piece suit and well-groomed. He is presenting himself as being prepared for war. He is at war with his people. He's
playing that role in that moment as
he is
in chief. And the thing is,
and I think it has somehow influenced the behavior and the movement that is taking place right now in his country.
Well, the amazing thing I think about Zelensky is that he started off as a comedian and an actor. And perhaps we discredit that profession because, of course, as comedians and actors, one of the things you learn to do is to communicate.
Right.
And I believe he actually had a program in which he played a leader, and then in real life he became that leader.
Right.
And no one quite knew what to expect of him when he had something as traumatic and as challenging as a war. And he definitely has stepped up to the plate, and if I dare say, he has become the David against the Goliath.
Well, by comparison, his direct counterpart on the opposite side is the exact opposite of him. He was a military man himself and grew up under very stringent circumstances, very adverse circumstances. So for all intents and purposes, he is a battle-hardened type of man. But if you were going to weigh, and somehow it's impossible to have a conversation like this without seemingly being political, but we're going to have to venture down that road anyway, because these are men of great influence, that his style of leadership and the impact he's having, especially on the world scale and from an outsider looking on at the whole situation, is completely different to what Zelensky is presenting. And so you can see an imbalance there in the different styles of leadership, the perceptions of leadership that are happening right now. Because at some point in time, with men of great influence like that, you're going to form an opinion.
Of course. And we go back to the whole thing of why the importance of leaders. Warren Bennis, in his book on becoming a leader, says that there are three essential things that why leaders are important. He says the first is that leaders are perceived as the individual then that is going to be able to guide the people to success. So the quality of the leader depends very much on how the outcome will be, and especially in an organizational context, but in all contexts. The leader,
Yes.
it's repositing him to lead us or lead his followers to success.
Right.
The second thing that he says is that people need anchors, especially in turbulent times. It needs to be somebody that people turn to and feel that that person, yes, can take them through whatever they have to go through. And the third thing is that we expect our leaders to retain and restore the integrity of our institutions. So there is some kind of noble, moral, righteous behavior expected of our leaders. But again, in modern times, a lot of that has been challenged.
Oh, yeah.
We are seeing on the world stage all kinds of leaders that come from different backgrounds, have different behaviors and views about how to be appropriate and so on. We don't even have to mention names.
Yeah, I think our minds are drifting to. I know exactly where you're going with it, but remain unmentioned. But the stark comparison between who was there in that office and then who took over, I mean, really, it leaves one to wonder. Very big contradictions.
Electing two different kinds
Totally different. And then you wonder where people's mindsets are. But leadership has been something that people have craved from the very beginning of sociology, of people interacting with one another, a group of people existing. That's why I always like to, in some of the messages, highlight the fact that there is a tangible value to one person, one mindset, one individual can influence millions. The entire course of history has been changed, redirected, directed by one individual at a time. Individuals who have influenced and led in technology, individuals who have influenced entire countries politically, individuals who have influenced religion and ministry and spirituality.
We go back to that because there was the sort of great leader theory that was espoused by Carlyle, that really history is a biography of these great men who get up and influence change, whether you're a political leader, whether you're somebody like Napoleon or Handel, or you are a leader in culture like a Shakespeare, or you're a religious leader like Muhammad. Carlyle very much believed that these were special people endowed with special abilities that could take the human race forward.
Yes.
And I think that there was a feeling that you had to be born with these traits, that as a leader, you came with them in your DNA, and given the right circumstances or challenged by situations, you got up and you rose to this actual potential within you. There, of course, have been contradictions of that because people have talked about the behavioral theories.
Right.
The leader is really a product of his or her environment, and where we look at how the leader behaves in different situations, and therefore the leader can be trained
Yes.
for specific situations. What are your views on that?
Oh, I love this. I love where we're going with it because there are so many analogies, even within one's household, that you can look. I have adult children, and I have seen their transition from an early age and watching. I'm always watching for that leadership tendency. And which leads me to believe that it's a mixture of both. You can be born with that desire already embedded in you to lead, but then you have to be guided as well. You have to have some sort of guide which will tell you, okay, well, these are some ethical responsibilities that come with being a leader. Leadership is so fluid, Gillian, that it's not funny. I mean, we could talk for hours, days, months, weeks on this entire subject of leadership. Because
But again, excuse me for interrupting you, we put up with some real bullies as well.
oh, absolutely.
And why do we do that? You have someone who you have elected who really has no power other than the power that you give them. And yet we put up with bullies, we put up with incompetent people, we put up with despots.
Sometimes we make decisions and wedge ourselves into corners that unfortunately an amount of time will have to play out before you're actually able to have a voice to do anything. And whether or not, for example, if you know that you've elected a leader and you realize that enough people have realized that the leader is going down a path that could lead to their destruction, are they going to band together to make their voice heard to say, listen, this is not what we envisioned. We have to change this before the 4 years run out. We need a snap election. No. Are they going to do that, or are they not going to do that? History has shown that some people have actually done that before.
Definitely, we've had revolutions. We think of the French Revolution. We think of what happened in England with the first King Charles actually losing his head. And we see revolutions still happening across the world. But there's something disturbing I wanted to introduce because, we are seeing a world now where a lot of things are being directed by technology. And in fact, we see people being manipulated. We are told that all these bots that we have that come on social media, they can actually influence how we think. And I was looking at some observations that the philosopher Aldous Huxley made in his Brave New World. And he actually said that technology was going to lead us down a path where we would stop thinking for ourselves. We would find ourselves wanting more and more entertainment and leisure and pleasure.
Right.
But to think seriously about the issues of life. And we would get to a stage where a leader could be sold to us just as toothpaste is. He put it that way. He said through public relations and advertising. And in other words, he literally said we could get any idiot. Anybody could become our leader because we simply ascribe to them certain qualities. We create an excitement of celebrity around them. And the next thing you know, they're a leader and they may not be competent to carry out the role. Are we not seeing some of that right now in the modern world?
We are seeing that. And it leads us to believe, from a purely non-judgmental point of view. I'm not really a political individual per se, okay? My life is not guided by politics. Unfortunately, I suffer the influence of what is happening in the marketplace, what is happening in the world, but I'm not somebody who is driven by politics. But it does have an influence, and you have to wonder at the end of the day, have we turned into people who have disregarded ethical and moral responsibility? Have we become so one-dimensional that just as long as the pleasures of the flesh are being satisfied, then we really don't care. As long as my interests are being met, then I don't really care what's happening on the world stage.
Actually, Huxley predicted that too. But I want to take us back because we tend to shy away from the issue of politics. And yet politics has such a tremendous impact on our life.
It
Who we
does.
select as our leaders, the criteria by which we select them, how we rate them, and so on. I think we give them wide berth because, for example, if we selected someone to run our company and that company was run into the ground, became bankrupt, we would not keep electing or selecting that person. In fact, that person
No.
would be fired. Yet in the world of politics, there are some different criteria in that a lot of it, I think, is through our sentiment, through loyalty, through tradition. And right now, I think the world is saying, okay, who are going to be these visionary, competent leaders to take us forward? Now, having said that, I think sometimes that we put very big expectations on our leaders. For example, and I'll be very clear on it, we've just come through a pandemic. And I was listening to the television talking about the rating of our current leadership here, both
Right.
the government and the opposition. And I couldn't help thinking, okay, yes, we do need them to do certain things and to communicate with us on certain things.
Right.
But have we really factored what we have gone through? And have we looked at ourselves in relation to the world? The whole world is on the brink of a recession. We're suffering inflation. It's like we're in this little bubble by ourselves.
Right.
And we expect the leader to pull out of the hat a magic trick and make everything right. Are we as followers also needing to look at ourselves? Because someone once said, you can tell the quality of the leader by the followers. Right? And someone also said it's the followers that really determine the leader.
Right.
So what is it that is really missing? I'm going to ask, but I'm also going to proffer something. I find that people get elected. I mean, when they're campaigning, they're on the ground, they're there, they're talking to everybody. They get elected, and it seems as though they lock themselves away. And I think it's a great disadvantage to them and to us. I'm looking at this time to see the leaders walking amongst the people.
Right.
I'm thinking of servant leadership now.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And I'd just like your comment on that.
servant leadership. It's one of these things that I don't believe it's for everybody. Servant leadership. It takes a different quality of leader to be a servant leader. People don't understand. I mean, if you look at even the ancient samurais who were viewed as the iconic battle-hardened heroes and protectors of Japan. Samurai really means, Bushido really is talking about servant, being someone's servant, serving the people. It was actually a political terminology that was way beyond their time. But again, it was what they were portraying that sort of led to that.